Hi, everybody. So today our goal is to chat through uh, what you can do within AWS to optimize your costs. But instead of focusing on just cleaning stuff up, it's more of a focus on what does next generation architecture look like and what are the things that you can be doing to kind of re-architect legacy applications into this more modern format. The way this works, if you want to chat, if you have questions, if you want to come up and hop on the soapbox with us, you're more than welcome to. Just press that little request button. If you don't have a request to speak button, you have to open this app on mobile to get that, which is kind of crazy. It's Twitter. They make the rules, not us. But in the meantime, I think we can go ahead and get started. So, Corey Quinn, introduce yourself here.
Hi, I'm Corey Quinn. I have an ongoing love affair with the sound of my own voice. I like cloud economics, making fun of large cloud companies, and once again, the sound of my own voice. Back to you.
And my name is Randall Hunt. I'm Vice President Cloud Strategy at Caylent. We're a cloud native consulting partner. We build backends in AWS and do all kinds of fun stuff with data and security. And if you ever want to, hire an AWS consultant, you should hire us. But that is not what we're here to talk about today. This is not a sales pitch. I'm going to start things off by asking Corey, what do you think is the single most expensive service in AWS?
That's a good question because are we talking about expensive in the sense of I can hit this one over my way and get the theoretically single largest bill that I can?
No,
Because
because
from that
because
perspective,
that's going to
savings
be,
plans, max
yeah,
that out and call it good. It's just pure cash. Here you go.
exactly.
Are we talking about the thing that is most overpriced for value? Are we talking about the thing that costs the most because it impacts effectively every user out there? Are we talking about a unit economic expensive? Are we talking about an impact expensive? There's a lot of ways to take it. This is not just me trying to put bandy words around. This is depending on your perspective. There's a lot of answers to this. And to be clear, the vast majority of AWS services deliver value for what they cost. That doesn't mean that it's a small amount of money, but it also doesn't mean it's unreasonable for what they do. And
So
then
let's
there are
take
some
out
others.
let's take out those marketplace cases, that the ones where you can press, or the buying the savings plan where you can press a button and spend millions of dollars. Let's talk more about those kind of most expensive for the value you get from it. And I guess like, let's talk about current state, because obviously Macy was pretty expensive when it first rolled out. But like, let's talk current state of services.
Sure. Let me preface this with I'm a little salty to begin with about SageMaker Canvas because last month I got a $260 surprise bill myself. That hasn't happened in little years because I'm very good at these things. Fixing cloud bills is what I do for a living, other than shitpost on Twitter. And if I can fall victim to that, basically anyone can. So I'm salty about that, but it does get to the concept that I care about, which is the most expensive cloud bill for anyone is the one that they weren't expecting because it has the haha, we've successfully tricked you into spending money on a thing you didn't realize you were spending money on. And that's just shitty. So setting that aside, the service I find the most overpriced is data transfer, specifically egress. Impacts everyone. We're still paying what feels like 1998 prices for bandwidth. And any modern application that we're talking about that's going to do live video streaming or audio streaming like Spaces, for example, the data transfer pricing means that you're just building this on the back of a cocktail napkin. You look at the economics of it, and well, we're certainly not putting it in AWS, so that's off the table entirely. It closes down an entire universe of potential applications just because it is so egregiously high.
I agree. And back in, what was it, November, right before reInvent, they announced the change in the pricing for egress from CloudFront and the expanded free tier to 100 gigs or something like that, or 10 gigs on the other one. But that free tier does not really affect customers operating at scale. I mean, it's probably a 0.1% decrease in their total cost.
And let's
And
be clear, every small customer believes that they're going to be operating at scale someday, give or take everyone.
true.
So when you're sitting there on the cocktail napkin figuring this stuff out, you're not planning for what if we had as many as a dozen users? No, you're planning on 20 users. And true, at that scale, no one pays retail pricing, but you're not going to get a 99% discount on a thing.
So one of the things that used to drive me absolutely bonkers about AWS was the inter AZ data cost, and then they would evangelize these best practices of deploying in multiple AZs. But there was Route 53 and other mechanisms. They were not AZ aware, so they would not route to the most cost-efficient AZ based on where the request came from. They do, in fact, do that now. You can set it so that it does that now. And then one of the things that rolled out a little bit earlier this year that was kind of like, I feel like people haven't paid attention to this, but transit gateway traffic and a couple of other things within the VPC have now made inter-AZ completely free. So
sort of. There's an asterisk next to that. There are still explicit charges that are brought out that have not gone away on transit gateway, specifically with respect to inter-AZ. The reason that those were changed, and from my understanding and belief, is that by using transit gateway as directed, as it says on the back of the box, and you roll it out, you wound up being charged for transit gateway, but it was also incurring a number of those charges in other parts of the bill, and it was not at all clear that it was being driven by your usage of transit gateway. So it is a price reduction in that they've removed a couple of billing dimensions, but you're still absolutely paying a per gigabyte fee on things passing through it.
but you're not getting the double charge, or
exactly.
Gotcha.
Or the managed NAT gateway, where you're paying your egress to internet fee in many cases, and the 4% data processing fee. And you see this across the board, where even if I want to load data onto a Snowball and send it to AWS, great. If I want them to load data onto a Snowball and send it to me, they'll do that. But in that direction, there's a 3 cent per gigabyte data transfer fee because it's data leaving AWS. Honestly, the way to really get data for free out of AWS is to put it into an S3 bucket or something similar, and then sue them for something, and then demand a copy of that data during the discovery process.
Yeah, but then I have my hourly fee for the lawyers, which is probably more than my egress fee. Although
this only works at certain points of scale. There, we can do the math, we can do the cloud economics calculations on this if it's necessary to your use case. We are thrilled to work with our clients. To be clear, I work at the Duckbill Group. I do not work at Caylent. I don't speak for anyone beyond my own silly little company, and that is very much by design.
So I think it's kind of interesting that the egress fees are brought up. I'm curious. We've seen from Azure and from, I think it's Oracle and Google, like they've joined in Cloudflare. They've joined this thing called the Bandwidth Alliance. They are, saying cost between themselves, but it still doesn't really save costs outbound to individuals or like other third-party telecoms or whatever.
I do believe on some level that the reason that they charge the pricing that they do, in part, and with the model for it, is what Amazon, if I'm being direct, would almost certainly prefer, is to make it extraordinarily expensive for me to transfer data to Google Cloud, if it were magically possible to also make it dirt cheap, if not free, to transfer it to end users at home. What they really, I feel like they're trying to do is use this as a form of lock-in strategy. If it's free for me to send a bunch of data to Google Cloud, well, yeah, an awful lot of Google Cloud's analytics offerings around data, for example, are significantly better than anything AWS has on offer.
So there's that. I don't know. Like, I don't know if I fully believe that. Like, from a business perspective, absolutely. Like, from a pure economics, financial analysis perspective, I can buy that argument. But from a customer experience perspective, and having worked at Amazon for a while, I'm not sure I'm bought into that idea. Like, at the end of the day, it's not my candy store, and I'm not privy to like the conversations that are happening at those levels. But my argument would be that the cost of these networks is actually quite high. Like, building this
I
infrastructure.
agree wholeheartely with what you're saying. I played in the network space myself. The problem is that when this works, you're charged in the direction where you're primarily using most heavily. And in their case, they said, great, that was mostly serving traffic to the internet. Great, so we're going to make ingress free. The problem is that most people do not have a nuanced understanding of this. And by charging nothing for data inwards to AWS, the perception psychologically among customers, regardless of what you know intellectually, it is reinforced through habit that, oh, it's free to send data in, therefore data transfer doesn't actually cost anything. This is untrue, but it is the perception that leaks out into the ecosystem, which means that the default perspective of data transfer egress fees is that it is simply punitive or rent-seeking behavior. Now, that's not necessarily my problem. My problem is the fact they haven't lowered the 9 cents a gig default outbound rate in 8 years or something like that in the primary regions. That's the egregious part that I want lowered.
I do want that lowered as well. What would you say to a model that did something along the lines of for a brand new region that's just been built out, it starts at the 9 cents per gigabyte egress. Over time, it lowers on a linear cost, because like the cost of putting in the initial fiber connections to and from these different data centers and locations is pretty high from a capital point. And then they do innovate within the data center and even within the metro fiber. I don't know if you remember James Hamilton's talk from 2017, where
I
he
do.
talked about how they changed the cables from having the 2-inch conduits, from having, what was it, like 3,000 fibers or something, into like 6,000 fibers in the same 2-inch conduit.
I
Like,
missed that part of it. No, that's fascinating though.
yeah, I think that's kind of impressive, because you're constantly increasing the capacity. And Hamilton said something like, fully scaled out US East 1 AZ region had something like 120 terabits of capacity, and that was in 2017. And of course, they've continued to innovate. And then they also talked about how, rather than moving to like a pure 100 gig space, they were using 25 gig NICs and SFPs, and then aggregating those into larger links, which works well, in my opinion, in the cloud, because you have to use multi-flow traffic to take advantage of those 100 gig links. Or like, let's say you have Tranium or something, and it's like the 800 gigabit per second link. Like, those you cannot push 800 gigs on a single flow. So like the aggregate, the 25 gig link aggregate that they're talking about, to me, is a better solution than what we're seeing from some of the other cloud providers, where they're talking like, look, we have InfiniBand for our whole set of servers, and it's under the ocean, and it's in Sweden. Like the stuff that gets good PR, but in reality just can't really be used except by some niche customer. And so I think by constantly innovating in this networking space, they're using that constant improvement and innovation to justify the continued egress cost. But I agree. I think it should be amortized. I think it should get lower, because a lot of that initial capital expenditure goes away.
One last point I'll add to this too, where at some level it feels like they may have built the wrong thing. Where along any other axis, I want to pay more and have faster CPUs, I can do that. I want to pay less and have less RAM, I can do that too. Storage, I want awesome storage that's super performant, I'll pay through the nose for that. I need a lot of storage, but it can be slow. They have options for that too. There's one size fits everyone from a networking perspective, which is great when you want an awesome network that lets you go full line rate between any two arbitrary points. That's magic. That is basically magic, and it's awesome. But there are use cases where I will say things like, I have this data here, and I'd like it to get over there, ideally by April. And as long as it does that, I'm fine. And I don't really care about how long it takes to do that or how many retries need to happen. Give me a cheap option for that.
All right. Yeah, I think that's a very wise observation. So we have Aaron here. And before Aaron, I know you have a question that you sent in, but before you ask it, I want to just recap what we're talking about today, since we have a couple more listeners now. Folks, we are really just kind of spitballing and taking an hour here to go over what next generation infrastructure should cost you and how you can optimize for AWS. Or we're not really focused about the focusing on like, oh, we forgot our EBS volumes, or oh, we forgot this NAT gateway was running, which everyone has dealt with, I'm sure, at some point in their cloud career. We're more thinking about how can we design architecture for the future that can take advantage of improving efficiencies and costs across different across AWS. So Aaron, I know you have a question. Please hop in and go ahead.
Yeah, well, I did submit a question over the text, but I think it's probably slightly different now. So I'll introduce myself first. So my name is Aaron Booth. I guess I consider myself a cloud sustainability advocate. If Corey Quinn can create his own job title, I've come up with mine quite recently. And you've talked a little bit around a couple of things, and I really love what you're saying. One is, what does Amazon do as a company to encourage certain behaviors? Ingress in, ingress out of data. That data gravity problem is definitely something we've observed. But then what else does Amazon do to encourage behavior? So if you look at sustainability, where do I care as a customer about what is the impact to the world, and actually what is my most efficient usage of the cloud, and what is the impact of that? Like for me, the purpose of the God, it's such a long name. Shared responsibility for model for sustainability is that all about getting people to care and be more efficient on the cloud, or to forget those problems and think about your own problem? And I think in some ways, is there some sort of is there a negative impact of always optimizing for efficiency, growth, scale, and cost versus getting developers to think more sustainably? Should we be just, I don't know, expanding networks, or should we be doing something different? I mean, I've said a lot, and I don't think there's one specific question, but
So I have some thoughts on this, and I actually did a Twitter thread on this just the other day. I think when you're vertically integrated, like an Azure or a Google or an AWS, there is a certain loss of efficiency. There's a gain of efficiency from a business perspective, but a loss of efficiency from a are you at capacity all the time? Are you right sized all the time? And because there is a uh, time factor in the one, allocation of real estate, two, delivering of energy, and then three, racking and stacking of different servers. These energy related costs and these allocation of capital is put over a time period. It's not like it's not like the API that we're given where I say I want a server and I immediately get a server. When you're building these things out, like, you are spreading that capital over a very long period of time, and the delay from the investment to the ROI is high, and you often have to plan for growth in particular regions. And I mean, there's whole teams that do like capacity planning and stuff at AWS. And so when you think about the sustainability aspect of that, I think something that's very interesting is, are these data center operators incentivized to operate from a business perspective? Are they incentivized to operate in the most sustainable way? And I don't know that they are incentivized from a business perspective to operate in the most sustainable way, but I do know that they are incentivized to operate in the most energy efficient way. So if energy efficiency can somehow be parlayed into sustainability, I would argue that the allocation of real estate, silicon, and energy into a data center is more efficient than the allocation of real estate, silicon, and energy into like the computer under my desk. So
I mean, this is one thing just on that point I find really frustrating, particularly around the new carbon cost calculator on Amazon, is what they're saying here is carbon, you're currently at level, but by 2025 it will be zero. And like, again, what is the impact of saying this to people is, oh, don't care about carbon, whatever, build what you want, grow, and that will make an impact. And it's like, once we get past carbon being a measure, I think we need to get to electricity, or at least something, because prices change, currency fluctuates, but the only true way of being efficient on the cloud is to understand it by energy consumption, I guess. And like, if we, this is the same company that can give us 1 millisecond evocation rates for the cost of Lambda and then give that down to a penny. Why can't I see the energy of everything and measure it that way? Like,
I'm sorry, the tweet that Corey just put out, inspired by your question, is absolutely hilarious, and just but no,
yeah, there's a lot of simpatico here. It's aligned. In the interest of full disclosure, I do have a piece coming out in the next month or so on this exact thing. The carbon cost analysis tool that AWS put out is an embarrassment. It is the corporate equivalent of the book report that you put together in middle school at 11 o'clock at night, the night before, while crying. That is what they've put out. Google's carbon analysis tool is a relative thing of absolute beauty. And I have screenshots and criticisms galore on just highlighting exactly how far it falls from. But the bigger problem, too, is that the cloud providers have a serious challenge in that, how do they measure this? Because use everything and spin up our services and it'll be fine is not ecologically responsible. And they also want to avoid the problem of an oil company tweeting that you need to help save the planet by taking shorter showers. There's very much a tightrope that they have to walk here. And I don't envy them that position. But I also am giving them absolutely no slack on anything that they deliver excellence on it, because it's that important.
The one thing I was thinking about recently, in the UK, there was a news article that came out recently which basically said the energy grid where London region is located is at capacity. And because of that, house building in London will now slow down by 11% over the next 12 years. If we've got to a situation where that region, where data centers exist and where houses exist, that houses can't be built, what about the point where data centers themselves cannot expand? If we don't encourage everyone who goes onto the clouds to be the most efficient way of doing it as possible, if they run out of boundaries in expansion of buildings or energy, they literally just lose access. Like, Netflix can't put any more of their locally hosted videos in there. Their existing clients can't expand, and it'll stop breaking things, and you can't even grow in customers. So I feel like, for me, almost that risk capacity of like expansion is get everyone efficient as they go in, and do that in a different way, not just by telling everyone you need to understand the cloud better because my product strategy is yes, and every single different service could be used wrong. Why don't we think about, okay, we'll help you with that, because S3 now chooses intelligent tiering by default rather than standard. There's so many ways that I think they could do this differently.
I disagree. I think we have good old economics here working correctly. Like the incentives are aligned for me as a consumer of cloud resources to use those as efficiently as possible, because otherwise my costs are higher. And then if I'm a data center operator like AWS, I'm incentivized to get my energy in the best way possible, the most reliable way possible, and to make the silicon on which I'm selling these cloud loads as efficient as possible. Like Amazon has a history of running a retail business that has very tight margins. Well, sometimes, and if they can parlay that kind of margin management expertise into the data center space, which I think, given the success of the business, we can all argue that they have, then this will just continuously improve, purely driven by the economics of consumption. Like they will either not open regions in places like the region in South Africa did not open for a very long time because of the inability to get power to that location consistently and reliably. And now that it is there, that involved like building new power infrastructure in that region. So like if you're going to open a local zone or a data center or a region in these different places, it's $1 billion plus investment that you have to go through to be able to scale that out. And so you as a developer don't often like see that margin because it's several sections removed from the consumption pricing. But you as a developer also, or as an infrastructure engineer also, have this incentive to operate your workloads as efficiently as possible so that you get the best usage-based pricing.
Corey, do you have anything to add? I did have a response, but
I will let you take it, please.
I think you look at, you talked about Africa and building a new massive data center in a part of the world which already has issues of access to electricity. The grid itself isn't set up for the people that live there. The water access specifically near Cape Town or South Africa, I think 33% of people who live in rural areas still can't access kind of clean running water. It's all ground well access. And, for me, when you think about efficiency and, what we want to build in the world, what do we want to do to make a difference? Is it right that developers can grow as big as possible because Amazon allows them to in that region and increase the strain on that area just because we think Twitter and TikTok is more important than actually some of these real issues in these areas? Like, before Amazon even could build that data center, why haven't they solved all of those problems in that region and isolated themselves from the grid or being 100% renewable energy? Because it's like at this point in time, you're talking about efficiencies of growth and economy and growing out of this problem. But how can we really grow if we're building data centers now that still aren't solving the problem of sustainability in every sense, not just energy?
I can't really comment on the non-energy side, but they did invest in the grid in these locations. Like Cape Town's grid was improved by the data center going there. So it's not that they're consuming power that didn't exist. They literally went in and built out that capacity. It's the same in Oregon. Like if you go to Amazon.com/sustainability or something, or maybe it's sustainability.amazon.com, you can see some of these energy projects that they've undertaken. And I think there's some absurd statistic, like they're the 18th largest energy operator in the world now. Like the argument of better for TikTok or these are not things that developers are deciding. These are things consumers are deciding. Consumers are the ones who want this stuff. Like if your problem is with like consumers not preferring TikTok over reading a book, like yeah, I absolutely agree, but like that's not the world we live in. And we in reality, like if these customers are demanding these things in this location, we're incentivized economically to go and build it out. And like I don't believe that we as developers have to be stewards of like the consumer behavior.
Yeah, maybe that's right in consumer behavior. And I'd agree with what you said. Like, if Amazon could 100% admit and say that where they're building new data centers, they isolate themselves and provide all energy, all water, and all cover all the impacts of building in that area, then yeah, there is no real sustainability issue in cloud. But I guess we already know we have existing data centers. Like I said, in London, 11% of houses reduction. In Ireland, they're already at 15% energy grid capacity, which is again impacting that region. And it's like there is a real world cost for developers to be more sustainable, and this is part of the argument. Like even if you're sitting here going, why should I care about cloud costs and why should I make it more efficient for my employer? It's not just about saving money for your employer. It does make an impact. Cloud exists in the real world as well. That's part of my argument. I'm not just trying to do this adversarially. I'm also trying to get people to care about saving costs.
No, I agree. It's just like if we could run everything purely on renewable energy and or like, you know, whatever the best form of energy translation into compute power is, that would be great. My argument here is that cloud is better incentivized and suited to doing this than any other method. Like this is well, any other method that currently
I'd
exists.
agree, definitely.
Yeah, like this is so much better than what it used to be, where we would go and we would like negotiate some contract with like Level 3 or Equinix, and we'd say, I want 2,000 servers that are going to sit idle and draw like, I don't know, 20 watts each for the next 10 years, even though like I'm only ever going to use 5 of them. Like this system, it better allocates the energy cost to a greater number of people while simultaneously delivering a larger value. That said, you're totally right that it could be better. And the way that it could be better is if it were slightly less vertically integrated, and like individual data center operators had this incentive to deliver their compute power to the Amazon, the Google, the Azures of the world in the most effective manner. But that's a super low margin business.
Everything doesn't have to be about margin, does it? I guess. I mean, it's a lot of risk for those providers. Corey?
I think that there needs to be obviously macro margins that we care about, like Amazon, the company. It presumably, if it follows long-standing economic principles, the last 10 or 20 years have mostly ignored, it has to generate more money than it costs on an ongoing basis. Great. Okay, now you break it down a bit more. The divisions have to ideally each be profitable. And if you look at AWS as being a division, okay, great. That breaks down further. Does every service independently need to be profitable? And that's where it gets super hazy. The answer is no, of course not. IAM does not charge. And if they start charging per transaction with IAM, I quit. And so does everyone else. Same story with the billing system. That is a freaking modern marvel with respect to how convoluted it is, how correct it has to be, the sheer scale of the data that it has to operate on. It's a massive problem, and the billing system itself is not something that they can charge for. And that means that the cost has to be amortized out over other services. And I've been a big believer there should be more of that. I don't think, for example, that any cloud provider should be viewing security services like Macy, for example, or CloudTrail, or I don't know, anything additional like Security Hub or whatnot, because I think that should be baked in for anything that exists within the boundaries of the cloud provider. Otherwise, what you're fundamentally asking a cloud provider, oh, you want some resources, you want to spin up some new instances. Cool. Do you want the expensive, secure kind or the cheap, shitty kind? And I really don't think that is the direction anyone wants to find customers having to make a decision.
It's a great point. Got two kind of levers: cost, reduce the cost, and encourage them to use the actual better services and access as well. It's like, is there something around like a startup account where they're like, well, this is the most efficient way of using the cloud at this point in time. If you use it from this point onwards, you won't need to worry about any of the other weird services. Just ignore them, and then that gives you more boundaries. Because I feel like boundaries is part of the way that you get change of behavior, especially when you're looking at, I'm implementing cost management across my organization. You're going to put rules in place, policies, dashboards, spending controls. It's like, how can the cloud providers give us all more boundaries to make this easier?
Get two people who work at AWS to agree, and yes, I'm with you.
So I think you bring up, Corey, kind of this point of how do these costs play out on the AWS side, as like, they have to operate and be a successful business. And we talk about modern infrastructure. And, before I get into my response there and my proposal there, let me just say very quickly, since we have a bunch of people in, if you are on mobile, you can request to speak. We're happy to have more speakers up here. Just press the little button in the bottom left to speak, and I will approve it. And we can, whenever you're not speaking, just go on mute, and then pop up your little hand if you want to, which is the little emoji button on the bottom right, and I can bring you up to speak. The thing that I'm thinking about is systems like AWS Lambda, where you were talking about the quality of resources. Like, do I want the high performance compute, or do I want the low performance compute? Well, with Lambda, I care significantly less about the underlying compute. I just want my workload to get executed. Like, I want it to run. And my kind of thought there, especially with regard to sustainability and profitability, like, can you build Lambda in such a way that it improves the net sustainability and the net profitability and the net margin of the company? Like, and I think the answer that we've seen from AWS is yes, but I'm not sure. And if that is the case, if the answer is yes, then should we all just move all of our workloads to Lambda wherever possible?
I feel like that's going to be the future. I mean, look at, okay, we've got loads of different states of the internet, but cloud's gone through generations. But, let's say 20% of our current workloads are on cloud and 80% of our old workloads are on premise and will be migrated or die at some point. In the future, I think will be cloud. And that's a bigger number than what we're on now. I don't know what it'll be. It'll grow, it'll double. And it's like, if from this point onwards, we're still allowing people to make the wrong decisions through all of time, I guess it's like, let's say serverless. Getting down to serverless is probably the most efficient option. I mean, if anyone's sitting here going, okay, how can I be the best cloud developer in the future, and when are people going to start caring about my skills? It will be serverless technology, and it will be over those sustainable elements, because at some point, cost is the most important thing. And I think at the moment, with the downturn in stocks and sort of investments, apparently VCs have been saying to startups, we won't invest in your cool startup idea and can prove cloud cost efficiency. So as soon as that's the requirement, the next requirement will be, you can't join my company unless you are dead hot on serverless or cloud cost efficiency. And that's only, 5-10 years away, probably?
I think there's a longer timeline than that. I know Christopher has a question here that was also in the chat. But yeah, no, I think serverless is the future for say 90% of workloads. There's still going to be certain workloads that sit in IO wait and like hold idle connections and stuff where serverless isn't going to be a great fit. And until there's a system that can like amortize that cost as well, I think you'll still have to use containerization or like something that exists on that serverless compute spectrum closer to the individual server side. But yeah, no, I think like serverless is a model that scales linearly typically, whereas infrastructure is a constant, pure infrastructure, pure servers, you're constantly right sizing and adjusting. So I think it's a pretty interesting area, and I'm glad that VCs are thinking about this now, because previously they weren't. Like, people just were writing blank checks. Corey, I don't know if you had something to add, or if I should ask Christopher to ask their question.
No, let's go for new questions. It's always good to avoid tackling the same thing again and again. Hit me. What have we got?
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Go for it.
All right, cool. So my question comes with, so you had mentioned much earlier that, we've all dealt with this problem of adding up the costs of things like an ELB we forgot to delete, an instance that an intern created and we forgot to remove, and we get hit with a surprise bill. As companies that use the cloud grow, that wasted or underutilized costs that, slipped through the cracks, or that we didn't have enough cost control infrastructure to pay attention to, that adds up quickly. So my question is, I've done this for my own work, and when you add up all of those costs, it can become a significant percentage of the bill, to the point where I'm wondering, like, a lot of companies that use AWS probably aren't using it at maximum efficiency.
None are, full stop.
Right, and the waste is probably in the double-digit percentages on average. So let's pretend that tomorrow some miracle occurs and every company is cloud efficient. Guess what happens to AWS or GCP or Azure? They take a 20 to 30% hit on their bottom line, and they go away. So the question here is, does the cloud existentially depend on waste?
No, it's sufficient to the over large margins, perhaps. I mean, we all, on some level, would find it economically advantageous in the short term to be able to sell people something that they never use, pick up, or accept, because that's just giving you money in return for, quite literally, nothing whatsoever. The downside to doing that, of course, is that you don't get a whole lot of repeat business, and people start to resent you for it, and it leaves you massively open to disruption, which is fine, but maybe not for you. The problem here is that as you look through what people are doing and how they want to use these things, well, is waste actually waste? There are a lot of tools that claim to say, oh yeah, we'll find all your idle resources. Cool. Please don't turn off the hot DR site that's going to have a 3-second warning before it has to take production level traffic load. That doesn't make sense. Other times, there's a bunch of stuff there that looks highly used, and that's great, except you wind up that there's been some sort of bug where it's just been stuck with a memory leak, or or trying to see how quickly it can complete running an infinite loop, and you see workloads that are artificially high. Waste takes different forms and requires significant context looking at these things. And at some point, it makes sense for companies to stop cutting. Because remember, if there's a big server sitting somewhere, in the cloud environment, called an instance. I know that's what we call them now. And I don't think it's doing anything. I have two choices. I can leave it running, in which case my downside to as a business, ignoring the negative sustainability externalities here, is simply that it's just going to cost me extra money. It's only money after all. Whereas the failure mode in the other direction is, holy shit, that was the database, and now we don't have a company anymore. So it makes sense in many respects for companies to not focus on cutting waste, because the upside opportunity, which companies are inherently optimized for far more than we are as individuals, more toward earning additional revenue than trimming costs, there's much better outcome for them by focusing on the things that make them significant amounts of money. I finally got around on my end to cutting our AWS bill every month from a little over $100 to about 500 and change now. That's been on my back burner for a while because of what we do. But remember, we spend tens of thousands of dollars every month in payroll. There are bigger opportunities for us than trying to play around the margins. So if we want to see companies start taking this more seriously, there has to be a reason that they would do it logically and rationally. And I don't think past a certain point we have one yet.
I mean,
other than the great
carbon wouldn't be enough.
Of course not. Since when have companies done the thing that
right.
is for the greater good at the expense of their own margins or their own stock performance?
And Christopher, think about it this way as well. Like your fundamental question of, does the cloud existentially depend on waste? It doesn't, because those resources that are now not being used are either taking less power. They're not sitting, consuming the same amount of power that they would if they were under use, or they are being retasked in other services that aren't being wasted, or other services that are capacity constrained. And it's the fungibility of this underlying resource is not pure liquid, but it is mutable. Like we can move these around to different services so that if we lose margin in one area because everyone magically cuts their waste, we can now add additional margin in other areas and additional capacity in other areas. So I think like there is a tremendous demand for more storage, faster networking, faster compute, all of these things. And if you talk about margins like 20%, most companies and most data center operators have significantly better margins than that. And when you have a product on top of that, well, a product like EC2 or a product like Lambda or a product like, well, let's not use API Gateway as an example, actually, but when you have these products on top of that, you get a product margin and a service margin that are both relatively high. So even if we were to magically cut all the waste spending in the world, I really doubt AWS, GCP, and Azure would go away. Maybe GCP, but
I was going to say maybe GCP. They seem to be the one in the worst position right now, and already thinking about cuts just from their own the product capacity. But I think what I would say to reassure thinking about like Amazon or cloud providers, like you think about how they operate. They could have continued to operate EC2 only, EC2 and S3 only. They could have just strung those two things together, said that is done, we don't care anymore. But look, these are actual real centers of innovation, and Amazon in particular, always at the forefront of cloud technology. Like the concept of serverless and that ability to basically code as a service, or like running code as a service. It's like that is probably one of the most sustainable innovations in tech in history, since maybe some of those kind of early ones. But like they are incentivized technology wise, and they are doing that. And they also, when you do work with them as a customer or a client, they're the ones basically saying, why aren't you doing this? They're the ones who will help you with no kind of ill will or anything else to save money and be more efficient. And I think that plays into a lot of things. One, capacity planning, and two, that goodwill. Like I don't know. I mean, who's to say who's going to be on the board of Amazon in 20 years' time to increase the prices? But as far as I look at it, I don't think they do optimize for encouraging waste.
Yeah. So I want to do a quick recap. We have about 15 minutes left here, folks. We're talking about cloud costs and as well as sustainability, and just wherever this conversation takes us for the next 15 minutes, we're just kind of exploring different topics and talking a little bit about what the next generation of infrastructure and efficiency looks like in the cloud. If you would love to speak or like to speak, just press the request to speak button in the bottom left there. You do have to be on mobile, and I think you might have to be on iOS. I can't remember exactly. And you can also, use the little emoji button on the bottom right there to raise your hand if you have a question. You can type questions in the bottom right too to have those read out if you don't want to speak. And generally, we're just kind of sharing our experience and thoughts and knowledge here. And Corey, I want to move on to a different sort of question, which is, I started this off by asking, what do you think is the most expensive for the least value kind of AWS service? So what do you think is the best value AWS service?
The billing console, probably.
That's a really good question, because the answer comes down to, honestly, what is the customer attempting to achieve? Because there's stuff out there that is of tremendous value that I think is freaking transformative. I mean, I am running my last tweet in AWS.com shitpost Twitter client that started off as a joke and turned into something that's actually useful. It's the only client I know of that automatically OCRs and does alt text and descriptions and the rest. But it's running on a whole bunch of different technologies chained together in 20 simultaneous AWS regions. And it cost me, generally speaking, a couple of bucks a month to run all of this. And of course, $20 in AWS config charges when I do a whole series of deployments in a month. Why? Because screw me, that's why. But by and large, the value for something like that, do you have any idea what that would have cost in a time before cloud for me to just get the baseline infrastructure up running for that? Even I'm renting VPSs in a bunch of different locations around the world, we're still talking thousands of dollars easily. And this cost me basically nothing other than my time and burning through the patience of people I have to ask questions to, like Randall.
No, it didn't burn through my patience at all. It's called getting
Just wait, I have more to go.
It's called getting nerd sniped. It happens to me all the time. Someone poses. It actually just happened yesterday with one of the people on our team. We have a customer that's interested in moving from one infrastructure as code provider to another infrastructure as code provider, and the question was, how can we maintain the same logical IDs in the CloudFormation stack? And I went so deep on that question, and I ended up writing like a command line tool, and then it was 2 a.m, and I was like, you know what? I probably should focus on my real job instead of getting nerd sniped every day. These are great problems to have, though. So on my side, I think the service that's kind of like the best value, for me, it's still Lambda. I think it was it wasn't the first compute platform of its type. There was actually something back in the day called Iron.io, and before that, Yahoo had an offering back in like 2004 that was somewhat similar to Lambda. But it's the first one to bring this concept of functions as service to the fore. And I believe the continued innovation that we've seen in that space is just massive. You can make the argument that S3 is also like the best value, but I think there are competitors to S3 that, while they might not have all the same features, do offer price performance. And so for me, it's Lambda. I still think Lambda is just like a magical piece of technology, and I love using it.
I would agree, as envisioned. The challenge is that in practice, a lot of Lambda recommendations coming from Amazon themselves are use Lambda to spackle over our own service gaps. And that's annoying, truly. But you're right. Once you break your brain in the proper ways to really embrace what Lambda can be, it becomes transformative. And you can also use it in horrifying ways. Like I use it as a series of Lambda functions as GitHub Actions runners so that I can wind up doing CDK deploys for effectively no money whatsoever. Now, is this a recommended use? Absolutely not. But anything's a hammer if you hold it wrong.
What?
Right.
What was the last part of what you just said?
I said anything can be a hammer if you hold it wrong.
Your phone.
Yeah, exactly. iPads, absolutely.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so just folks, if you're just joining, feel free to request to speak, or if you have any questions, go ahead. One of the things that I'd love to kind of talk through now is what can we do? Let's say I am a business and I am offering a SaaS or something on AWS, and my customers are also on AWS. Are there things we can do now that we couldn't do before that will optimize the efficiency and cost of operating that service?
Really depends on,
no, please, after you.
It depends on the SaaS service, really. If it's a sort of web-fronted SaaS service where it's I'm a small employee, typing away and filling something in. But if your customer is a lot more integrated with the business side, then because I think like data transfer is always an issue, isn't it? It's like, how do we securely kind of share stuff like billing information? How do we securely share other things that we need to kind of transfer between what you do and what you're looking at? And I think it's definitely something around like data transfers and almost like not only reassuring them it's cheap, but also saying it's secure. Because I think that's the biggest problem when I've dealt with dealing with SaaS services outside of my organization is, okay, what are you going to take from me? How are you going to like take it? Where are you going to store it in the world? And I think the other thing, inspired by Corey's comment of operating in 20 regions, like when I was, I worked in the UK, I was a former head of cloud for the UK Home Office, a large government department. And, for me, I couldn't use certain SaaS services if that went and took my data to the US one region. So I'd say offer data storage or transfer that wherever your customers are and make it secure as possible, maybe using some fun internal routes. I don't know.
So I think, the ability to spin up your own private link is one of the very cool things that I've seen. I think MongoDB, the company, is taking pretty solid advantage of this now. Like for their Atlas service and their, I forget what the name, they've changed the names of these services a few times, but they basically will spin up in a network interface in your VPC, and then it will route to their infrastructure, which also runs on a combo of AWS and like colos and stuff. And it will route in the most cost-efficient manner for them to offer that service to their end users. And you can imagine like any SaaS provider now has that capability. And it's still not like automagical. Like I think that it can always get better, but this sort of stuff was not really possible to do before securely. Like you would have had to give credentials to that SaaS operator to spin something up in your account. But now with resource access manager and a couple other things, like I remain in complete control of my account. I don't have to authorize anything. Like there's no chance of like data egress or things. Like it's much better than it used to be.
There have been so many changes that it's almost hard to look at and remember in some cases time before this thing was possible. It's almost frustrating in a way. EBS multi-attach came out somewhat recently.
Oh,
and
right.
I remember demanding that back in 2011 because I was still stuck in data center thinking. And I've got to say, on the one hand, it's great to see the stuff advancing. On the other, I feel it took the chumps way out, which is honestly, instead of learning how to do something new, I should have just thrown a hissy fit, dug my heels in for a decade and waited, and it would have been just fine because they'll eventually come out with everything. So it's a mixed bag.
You bring up something interesting. So we had Adrian Cockcroft on one of our Twitter spaces a couple months ago, and he was chatting about, because there was this inter-AZ data charge, and because AWS in the early days did not have AZ-aware routing for different endpoints and services, Netflix just went and built their own AZ-aware router because the 1 cent cost of data transfer was enough in aggregate that it mattered to them. And so I always run into this question of, what's the ROI on me solving this, and should I wait for Amazon to solve it for me?
I hope Amazon bought that. Oh well, I hope Netflix offered that software in exchange for a good net price discount. Anyway,
I think I can't remember what it was called. I want to say it was called Luigi, but that was the Spotify thing. It was, oh man, it's been a long time. And speaking of Netflix tools, they invented ICE, which was the OG tag multi-account cost control manager. Does anyone remember that, the ICE program?
Yes. Netflix ICE is that they sold it off to TVidy, if memory serves.
Oh,
and
wow.
So great, that was basically a big marketing thing for TVidy, and they had like 3 commits and never touched it again. Okay, that's a Netflix open source project, all right. And someone else wanted to get in on that whole ignore it to death thing. I still believe on some level that when a big company or most companies open source something, what it'll often be is a senior engineer there who's been working on that thing for ages is basically like tossing a football to themselves as they move across the street so they can catch it at their new job and continue where they left off without having to necessarily contribute anything back. That's hugely cynical and also almost certainly correct.
So along those veins, but moving back towards the cost control side, like
Wow.
what are the modern tools that people should use, open source or even paid? What are the things that people should be using to kind of maintain their cloud cost controls and efficiencies?
I am not. No one's going to like my answer for this, but I believe across the board it is primarily not a tooling issue, and it's not something the tools are going to be able to solve. Yes, turn on AWS budgets, but when it comes to deeper analysis, I'm sorry, the number one tool people are going to use is Microsoft Excel, and there's a bunch of things you can do to make that more effective and more helpful. And at certain points of scale, Excel starts screaming, and your computer starts smelling like molten metal. But until you get to that point, it works reasonably well. the challenge is the real questions around cost control and cost optimization always come down to what is the context of the business that you're in. Because very vanishingly few things that people have out there are AWS start to finish. They use third-party APIs and the rest. And the APS and the AWS portion is just a relatively small, in some cases, percentage of the actual cost of goods sold in that scenario. It comes down to understanding what the business actually cares about at that scale. On the other side of the universe, when you're just, I'm trying to learn these things and I don't want to wind up with a surprise bill. Well, the tool I use for that, kidding? Oracle Cloud. Their free tier will never charge you a penny until you intentionally upgrade your account, which in turn means that, yes, they're going to stop serving traffic past a certain point, but I prefer that to getting a $70,000 billing surprise in my dorm room.
Yeah. Well, what about like best practices then? If it's not a tooling issue, like what are some best practices people can undertake to kind of, whether it's tagging resources or you've talked about like building up a budget and things, but like within AWS in particular, like what are things that customers should be doing that they might not be doing?
Reading the bill with the understanding of what is happening in their environment in mind, and look for anything that starts to raise questions. I know that AWS loves to present the bill in alphabetical order, but humor me for a minute. Don't approach it that way. Take this novel, radical concept and instead start with the big numbers first, rather than trying to optimize Alexa for business because it's alphabetical supremacy. So that's part of it. And then just be aware of what's happening. Cloud cost, whether people want to admit it or not, is an engineering problem. It is cost in the cloud and architecture are one and the same, whether we admit it or not. Other than that, the obvious answers, the best things to do to avoid bill surprises are, turn on MFA for your account. Don't commit credentials into public GitHub repositories. It's more of an InfoSec story. And of course, if you do get a giant bill surprise, reach out to AWS support and have patience. It may take time. Reach out to me if you're not satisfied there, but I have never yet heard of them actually bankrupt someone based upon a compromised account or even unintentional use by the customer themselves. That is not how they intend to make their money. I just hate that the process is as stressful as it is.
We are at time, so if you have to drop, no worries. But I had a couple more questions I was going to go through with the folks here.
Mind if I add one for the tools and open source stuff?
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, I'd say for like the two questions that you said, there's one thing that you could look at, and it's more about learning cloud cost optimization. So there's the well-architected kind of workshops. I can't remember what they're called, but the kudos dashboard basically is a good starting point. If you have no idea what to do and someone's got some time with Terraform and wants to deploy something small in one account, the kudos dashboards and connecting your billing data to that can be a good start. But obviously there's other options. And then two, even if you know what the biggest things are on the bill, tagging is always the start of everything. Like you want tagging to go in automatically when you're deploying things, whether that's through your CI/CD pipeline. Tagging should be kind of baked into that, especially if you are using code for the infrastructure as code. But if you haven't done that and you need to catch up, you need to go back and review your things and re-tag them. And I think, because to be honest, like, if you say, oh, that's growing, that's really big, this is where the anomaly is, and you have no idea who to go and speak to about it because you don't know what team is responsible, you don't know what cost code is responsible, you don't know, who's built the thing, what developer turned that one on, how do you go and turn it off and understand the context without just pressing the button. I think tagging and the kudos dashboards.
So that brings me very well into my next question, actually, which is, do developers have a responsibility? Let's say application developers and infrastructure developers, both, do they have a responsibility to understand the costs of what they're doing?
I mean, you think about security as job zero, and everyone has a responsibility for security in the cloud. I would say conversely, if you care about efficiency, you care about the other costs of using the cloud, then you also have a responsibility for cost. And I would say the one thing is it's really hard for a developer to do that. If you go and deploy something, there's no records that you deployed that potentially, depends on your CI/CD deployment or how you use IAM to do things. So if you don't have a record of who did it, how am I ever know how much I've kind of contributed to that? I guess the only thing you can do is know that when you are working on the cloud, anything you can do to reduce it is going to be a positive. You can't really figure out like what you've contributed to it, but you're making it better every time you try and deploy a new thing or optimize something. Then that's at least something you can do.
I'm going to take a devil's advocate stance on this and say, no, developers don't have a responsibility for that. Their managers and their CEOs and their boards do, because developers have to do what their management tells them to do. And so, no, they don't. the leaders do.
It's a good point. How do you optimize for that behavior? If you're like monitoring or encouraging the wrong thing, I need you to deploy faster rather than I need you to deploy in the most efficient way. Then yeah, you can't expect people to be the best, most efficient if that is what you're competing against. I'd agree definitely with that. So it's a combination of everyone being responsible, I guess.
I think saying I'll take the middle of the road and say part of the responsibility is on the individual and developer, and part of the responsibility is on the business and it is on management. And one of the things that you can do to enable the developers to be successful in something like that is process and tooling. So there's a cool little VS Code plugin that I just saw that's called Infra Cost, and if you're working on like CloudFormation or Terraform or CDK or whatever, it will guesstimate for you what the hourly costs are going to be of that deployment.
Take it with a significant grain of salt.
Oh yeah. Like, and they're very clear about that. Like, this is a guesstimate. This is not a hard number. And like, think about tooling like that. So when you make a pull request, you have something that comes in and says, hey, we think this will decrease cost by this much or increase cost by this much. I mean, at the end of the day, with infrastructure as code, it's an abstract syntax tree that we can parse and we can derive some value from. That said, there are externalities that aren't in the IAC that will drive and change costs that I don't think it's the individual developer's job to fully understand what those be, but there does need to be a mechanism and a process in the business to address those. Like a product manager or a general manager, like they should have some insight into the unit economics of their applications and understand that, each monthly active user costs me $0.01. Am I making enough money off of that one monthly active user to justify spending that $0.01? Or do I have to get off of Cognito and like roll my own auth, which is just hell?
I guess that's the only real true efficiency metric, isn't it? Is that like, whatever your business value or outcome is, whatever it is you're achieving versus the cost. So, you can put the boundary around your business or around your product. That's the one thing you can measure and all bring down or increase. Yeah.
I've also seen some interesting tools in this space lately. I've seen SteamPipe, which is this open source tool that lets you kind of use SQL-like language to query all of your cloud resources. They have a plugin called Thrifty. There's Cloud Custodian. There's Risotto. There's a lot of there are a ton of tools and practices in this space, and I don't think anyone has agreed like this one is the best. There's no consensus really. But in terms of best practices, like you said, Aaron, it's all about the tagging. That's definitely a good thing to do. Restricting, leveraging CloudTrail and SSO to be able to understand who or what is deploying things is also pretty vital. And managing that and building reports on that are like, I've seen times where you will have a $1,000 a day spike in your bill, and if you can't address that in 20, well, and sorry, this is it, the scale where $1,000 a day spike is like significant. There are some businesses where $1,000 a day spike is nothing for them. But like, let's say you have this $1,000 a day spike, and your average spend is a couple $100. If you can't figure out why that happened and address it in a couple hours, you're not set up correctly to be able to run your business efficiently. Like, maybe it is okay that you spent that extra $1,000 because there was also an increase in the business, or maybe it's not okay and it happens to be some misconfigured resource, in which case you have to build out not just the technical capability but also the organizational capability to be able to respond to that. And that involves training, it involves fire drills, it involves like humans actually practicing what happens if we get this billing alarm or if we get this host down alarm. The same way we practice like availability engineering, we should also practice cost and economic engineering, in my opinion.
The challenge is that you're right. You and I have a certain level of experience in how these things go, and most folks in operational roles at large companies will as well. My concern is I'm thinking about what is the best practice advice you give to someone who's just starting off on their cloud journey. Maybe they're a student, maybe they're a new founder who's trying to learn just enough to get their idea out into the world. What advice do you give them? Because in many cases, the intellectual burden of just absorbing this entire new universe of information, there's a lot of things competing for primacy in what to pay attention to and focus on. And I'm sorry, if billing is that thing, you've already lost.
Yeah, There was, I forget who tweeted this. It was just yesterday. They tweeted something along the lines of, most people fail to pick up a new language or fail to pick up a new service or fail to, learn this new thing, not because it is hard or difficult. It's because they don't understand the learning curve, or the learning curve does not match the expectation that they had. They think the learning curve is linear, but in reality, it's, stepwise or exponential even. And taking that concept and applying it to the cloud, like there's a certain set of fundamentals that are like a big barrier to overcome before you can successfully begin to operate application and production scale applications in the cloud. Like it's not enough to learn, oh, I can launch a Lambda. Like you also have to know IAM. You also have to know like a couple other things. So it's a good point. It's a big barrier.
I mean, I'm a startup founder, and I guess, Corey, you were once and still is, I guess, your business now. But is there that resource then for, I am a startup founder, this is all I need to care about for cloud, and here's some good tips? Does that exist?
There are, but the challenge too is that if you think about it, who are you talking to in your target audience here? Are you talking about someone who is spinning up a whole bunch of EC2 instances in a VPC so it looks like their data center? Are you talking to someone who's going to build this whole thing in Lambda and needs to know how that stuff works? Are you talking to folks, arguably, who are using AWS but further up the stack, like an IT person who's provisioning a bunch of Amazon workspaces? Are you talking about people going to write containers and throw it over the wall for ECS and Fargate to wind up running? There are a lot, because the advice around what to think about cloud economically is radically different in each of those paths.
I think that's one thing I always find that fails for me in a lot of the documentation and content on Amazon's website, is that it doesn't allow you to specify like your customer group or the technology that you might be using or whatever else. Like, if I look at security and I go, okay, I'm enterprise and I don't use serverless, like I feel like there could be a lot more that's available where you could just do that, for example. Tag some of the pages for like relevance so you can search by it.
Yeah, it's a difficult problem. I attempted to solve this problem way back in 2014 with the AWS Docs team, and the issue we ran into, honestly, was that the breadth of customers is massive, and the relative depth that each customer needs in each section is very small on average. There are some customers that need to be really, really deep on one particular service, and then when you average out the depth they need on all the other services, it's like non-existent. And so figuring out what that kind of overlap is, if you were to stack all the customers on top of each other and trying to figure out the shape of that, ended up being just too difficult. But I think it could be better, but I don't think you're ever going to get to like 100% success on that one. I think they should aim for like 75% success on that one.
Good insight though, and you're right. There's such a, and like what Corey said earlier, like everything that you do in the cloud depends on your context and what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve.
Oh, yeah.
That's what you need to focus on.
I do have to run, but everyone else here is welcome to stick around if you'd like. Corey, I don't know if you have to run as well, or if you want to continue.
I do, unfortunately. I have a newsletter to get out after all.
All right. Well, I wanted to say thanks to Corey, Aaron, Christopher for joining us today, and thanks for hopping on and asking these questions. If you have anything else that you're interested in, feel free to reply to the tweets here, and we're happy to follow up. I'll just do a quick plug for myself, and then I'll let all the other speakers do a plug, and then we'll close it out. So Caylent, like I said in the beginning, we're a cloud native consulting company. If these are questions or issues that you are interested in solving, feel free to talk with us. Corey's team can do a lot of the analysis and understanding of your AWS bill, and our team, we can do a lot of that implementation. There's a lot of fun stuff to kind of talk through there. I am so thrilled that we had this conversation today. Corey, go ahead, do your plug, close it all out.
Sure. I think for this one, go to lastweekinaws.com and subscribe to that ridiculous free newsletter, because it expresses everything wrong with my personality that you've heard over the past hour or so in weekly form, talking about what AWS has done this time. I think you might enjoy it if you're still listening to this and haven't rage quit by now.
Aaron, go for your plug.
And for me, if you want to hear me rant more and talk in longer form, I run a podcast called Public Cloud for Public Good, talking about cloud sustainability and how to make the world a better place through the use of cloud. So you can find links on my profile. And yeah, the latest episode was actually with Tim Banks, who's the principal cloud economist at the Duckbill Group. So if you want to learn more about what does that job role mean if you want to do it yourself, or the type of people you might work with in your company. But yeah.
And then Christopher, anything you want to add? Any call to action? Any plugs?
I think everyone needs to pay more attention to cloud cost control. And I also think that figuring out how to monitor carbon and figuring out how the cloud intersects sustainability is an unsolved and very important new frontier that we all need to be paying attention to very soon.
Yeah, I just literally published a blog post yesterday called "Finding My Purpose in Tech," and honestly, like that intersection of cloud versus carbon and sustainability is this big, messy, complex problem that nobody has solved, even Amazon, even like everyone else who's involved. And I think everyone starts to just think a little bit. I'd agree as well.
All right. Thanks for those call outs. And now that everyone's heard this, I want to just thanks again to our wonderful speakers. Thanks again to all of our listeners. And I hope everyone has a great Friday, a great weekend. And feel free to reply and tweet with all of your cool cloud tools. All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
I'd agree as well.
All right. Thanks for those call outs. And now that everyone's heard this, I want to just thanks again to our wonderful speakers. Thanks again to all of our listeners. And I hope everyone has a great Friday, a great weekend. And feel free to reply and tweet with all of your cool cloud tools. All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.